Hello, folks. I just wanted to take a few moments this evening and share with you a little bit about what happened in Nashville, Tennessee a couple of weeks ago at the Southern Baptist Convention. Hopefully this serves as a little bit of an education for everybody, but more importantly, I want it to be a time of encouragement for us because I think it's exciting that our church gets to be a part of the great move of God across our country and across our globe. And so I just want to encourage you with some of the events that took place and are taking place across our denomination. Just by way of housekeeping, just so you know, we as Baptists are entirely unique in church polity in the way we conduct ourselves. We, as First Baptist Church, choose to affiliate with the Pilot Mountain Baptist Association, which is a group of about 90 churches in the greater Winston-Salem area. We also choose freely to take part in the Baptist State Convention, and we choose to take part in the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the national denomination. At any point in time, we as a church can choose to leave any of the above. That's our choice. And when a lot of folks think of denominational structures, they think of the Presbyterian Church, the Methodist Church. They think of the Pentecostal church that has a hierarchy where individual congregations answer to a district or a conference or a presbytery, and so there's a hierarchical structure involved. Episcopalians and Catholics are the best at the hierarchy. They have bishops and archbishops and the Pope, but we don't answer to anyone but God Himself. And so we believe that God's Word is supreme, and we have the opportunity to do what we want to do the way we want to do it. That's called local church autonomy, and that is a knife that'll cut both ways, I promise. But because we choose to affiliate with the Southern Baptist Convention, the Southern Baptist Convention has no dictation rights in our church. Because of decisions that were made in Nashville, Tennessee 2 weeks ago, it doesn't have any effect on us whatsoever. If at any point in time the Southern Baptist Convention decides to go in a particular way, we have the right to opt out at any point. And so it's a free association of churches. We're not bound in some hierarchical structure, and we're not dictated to what we need to do or how we need to do things. And so it's a great thing. I've written before that independent Baptist church is a bit redundant because all Baptist churches are independent. We just choose to affiliate in a particular way. And so the Baptist State Convention meets every year in November-ish. We try to go each year. It's normally in Greensboro, and then the Southern Baptist Convention kind of rotates around the country in different big cities, and it's always a big affair. So I just wanted to kind of give y'all a rundown of what took place in Nashville, Tennessee a couple of weeks ago, and hopefully encourage us all with some of the big takeaways that I found as a result of the events. I was very proud that one of my former pastors, J.D. Greer, he's the pastor of the Summit Church down in Durham. I attended the Summit Church when I was a college student, and J.D. was the presiding officer of the convention. He actually spent his third year as the president. Tradition holds that you spend 2 years as the president and then you go along your merry way. But because there was no convention meeting in 2020, he was the de facto president for 3 years, which is unprecedented. But he did a fantastic job of conducting business. And there's always time of prayer. There's always time of music. There's great preaching involved. In fact, one of the highlights of Monday evening before the convention actually started was a commissioning service from the North American Mission Board and the International Mission Board, and I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But in the midst of all the great spiritual fervor and time of celebration and great encouragement to my soul, there's also lots of business that needs to be conducted, and so there are a series of motions and resolutions. And those are two different things, and those are really the two vehicles through which the Southern Baptist Convention conducts its business. And so there's a period of time in the agenda where you can make motions. Any Tom, Dick, or Harry can stand up at a microphone and make a motion for a particular action to take place. And then there's a committee that dispenses that motion to the appropriate agency or whatever for further review. Well, there's also resolutions that are basically position statements. They're the opinion of this year's particular convention body. And resolutions sometimes lack clarity on purpose. Sometimes they're very specific in their wording. But it's a position statement that's basically used to be kind of a public statement to the press. I was very aware that secular media was there in the convention hall. That was exciting. In fact, JD, and this just goes to the graciousness and the good-humoredness of his leadership. There were a number of times we had a prayer of commissioning. And so everybody kind of symbolically lays hands on whoever's being commissioned. And JD said very nonchalantly, be sure to bend your elbow and hold your hand out like this. Don't go too hard in a particular direction. He said it's not going to be a good look for 16,000 Southern Baptists to all be standing like this. So he said the New York Times is here with their cameras, and bend your arm accordingly. So that just goes to show you the good-humored nature with which he conducted the business. And I was particularly proud of his work because he cultivated a spirit of humor and graciousness and unity, and he led with great wisdom. At the beginning of Tuesday morning, there's a particular agenda that's articulated in print. The agenda has to be approved. Well, in the approval process of the agenda, about 3/4 of the former presidents of the Southern Baptist Convention stood up and wanted to amend the agenda. And they basically gave up the recognition of former presidents time slot, which was about 15 minutes. And they gave up the recognition of former presidents time slot in an effort to have a concentrated time of prayer for unity. And I thought that was a great start to the convention meeting on Tuesday morning, because there was going to be a lot of contentious debate along the way, and I thought that was a really a good tone to set early in the convention meeting. We had a couple of exciting things happen along the way. Early on Tuesday, there was a period of time for new business where, again, any messenger that chooses to randomly walk up to a microphone, and there were like 12 different microphones, you can walk up and make a motion, and those are basically calls for action. I move that Southeastern Baptist Seminary do this or do that. And so there's all these motions, and if anybody gets a second, the motion is automatically given to the Committee on the Order of Business, and they issue it to its respective place. Well, there was a gentleman by the name of Grant Gaines, a great preacher from the Murfreesboro, Tennessee area. His father, Steve Gaines, is the pastor at Bellevue Baptist Church over in Memphis. And Steve Gaines followed Adrian Rogers at Bellevue. So I like Steve. I really liked Adrian Rogers as a preacher. I like Steve, and I like Grant too. But Grant Gaines stood up and made a motion that was kind of sucked all the air out of the room. And his motion was very specific. It was very carefully worded, and it called for an independent third-party investigation into the Southern Baptist Convention's executive committee on the issue of sexual abuse allegations and the mishandling thereof. And so that was kind of a watershed moment in the convention, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. Well, when he made the motion, of course, it went through the proper channels, and it got dealt with on Tuesday afternoon. But that issue was a really important issue before the convention this year, and I think it was a good thing. But for clarity's sake, the Southern Baptist Convention has 11 entities. They call them entities because they're really independent agencies. There are 6 seminaries. Southeastern Seminary is over in the town of Wake Forest, and that's where Luke and I got our master's degrees from. So Southeastern is one of the 6. There are 6 across the country. And then there's also the North American Mission Board and the International Mission Board. That makes 8. Let me go ahead and say this. The North American Mission Board is the beneficiary of our Annie Armstrong Easter offering. lots of church planting in the United States and Canada. And then the International Mission Board is the recipient of our Lottie Moon Christmas offering. It tends to be more clandestine mission work in faraway lands among unengaged people groups. And so you have the 6 seminaries and you have the 2 mission boards. That brings us to 8. 9 is Lifeway Christian Resources. I'm sure that name at least rings a bell. Lifeway Christian Resources. The 10th entity is Guidestone Financial Resources. It used to be called the Southern Baptist Annuity Board. The 11th is the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. And then finally there's the Executive Committee. And for 363 days a year, the Executive Committee acts as the governing agency of the Southern Baptist Convention. And it's comprised of about 100 members from different states across the country. And so the Executive Committee has a degree of power because it acts on behalf of the convention every day except for 2 each year. And so those different entities all have time of presentation, all have a time of reports. They are all subject to questions from the floor, which is always exciting. Again, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can make their way to a microphone and ask a question about any specific issue. And so the entities of the Southern Baptist Convention are subject to the convention, the members of the convention. So that issue about sexual abuse, mishandling of accusations was a kind of a watershed moment on Tuesday morning. And I'm going to come back to that because it got dealt with on Tuesday afternoon. And so the Executive Committee gets a big chunk of Tuesday morning to make recommendations. And there are bylaw amendments proposed. There are different kind of legal things that are voted yay or nay. As far as the technical side of the elections, everybody gets a little book of ballots. And so obviously it's a bright color and everybody raises their ballots if they want to vote a particular way. Or if it goes to a ballot vote, you can flip out and actually they have little tear out ballots and it has numbers 1 through 10. So you select whichever candidate or whichever way you want to go, or yes or no over on the end. And so if it goes to a ballot vote, everybody's got to take out their little book and pull out their right page and get up and mark their thing and everybody pass them in. And it's chaos because we had about 16,000 messengers in Nashville, and that was the highest attendance the Southern Baptist Convention had in about 25 years. So it was great to see so many different churches from across our country represented at that meeting. But yeah, that's how the ballots get cast. And so the Executive Committee's report entails a number of recommendations that usually come as a result of motions made at the last convention. And so there's action items taken as a result of the motions made last time. So there were changes to some constitutions, there were some bylaw amendments, there were some exciting things. And one of the things that happened, one of the recommendations from the Executive Committee was about the cooperative program budget. And I don't know if you've heard the term cooperative program. A particular portion, a particular percentage of our budget is our gift into the cooperative program. We send it down to the Baptist State Convention, and then the Baptist State Convention has a budget, and they send a big slice of the pie to Nashville for the Southern Baptist Convention. And so that's kind of how we funnel our resources. And so the cooperative program budget is this multi-million-dollar budget that has a whole series of spreadsheets in this book of reports. Well, some guy, I would argue, pinhead, stood up and wanted to make line item amendments to the budget. Well, you can't make line item amendments to the budget on the fly because there's so many committees that things have to go through. Well, the guy tried to make an amendment and it was ruled out of order. And so a pastor from North Carolina, who Pastor Jim and I quite like, Clint Presley, he's from down in the Charlotte area, he stood up and spoke against the amendment. Well, because the amendment had already been ruled out of order, Clint speaking against the amendment was also out of order. And of course, J.D. Greer from Durham and Clint from Charlotte are relatively close buddies. And J.D. said, Dr. Presley, your speech is out of order, and you need to sit down." And, of course, Clint Presley stood up and goes, "Are you calling me out of order, J.D.?" And it was this moment of levity, and everybody got a good chuckle out of it. It was really funny, and that was the spirit with which business was conducted. And I was so thankful for that, because there were some relatively contentious issues, and I was thankful that that was the spirit that ruled the day. But the budget carried, everything passed as it was supposed to. But just the way in which the meeting was conducted, I was so thankful for. There was a recommendation from the executive committee that failed overwhelmingly, and a couple of friends of mine here from North Carolina that I talked with along the way, they were like, "We have never seen that happen before, where the executive committee proposes something and everybody votes it down." But one of the things that happened was that they tried to establish fiscal accountability through the executive committee. So they wanted all the seminaries and all the mission boards to report fiscal accountability through the executive committee. And I think a lot of the messengers kind of viewed that as a power grab, and so everybody voted it down. And my buddies from North Carolina were like, "This is the first time we've ever seen anything like that happen and get shot down so quickly." There was also a thing that got voted down closely. It wasn't overwhelming. It actually went to a ballot. One of the recommendations from the executive committee was to change the ministry assignments of Lifeway and the North American Mission Board. And they wanted to move college ministry, the emphasis and the ownership of collegiate ministry from Lifeway to the North American Mission Board. Well, among that debate, it also dealt with the issue of homeschooling curriculum through Lifeway. And a gentleman from Kentucky stood up against the proposal because of the homeschool issue. And because of his impassioned speech, it was actually voted down. So then the executive committee had to come back and say, "Well, if you're not going to make the change about the college ministry thing, then I guess it's not going to affect the North American Mission Board either." So they ended up having to fall back on their sword. But that was an interesting little, almost procedural snafu that kind of got gummed up in the midst of conducting business. Another thing that took place on Tuesday was the presidential election. There were 4 candidates for president of the Southern Baptist Convention. Al Mohler, who is the head of Southern Seminary up in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm sure you may very well have heard that name before. Pastor Jim and I tend to throw the name Al Mohler around quite a bit. He's a very respected theologian in our camp. Al Mohler was one of the candidates, one of the nominees. Ed Litton from South Alabama, around Mobile, was one of the candidates. Mike Stone from Georgia was a candidate, and Randy Adams from the Pacific Northwest was a candidate. Well, it went to a first ballot, and because nobody received a majority of the votes, it ended up, there was a runoff election. So the top 2 vote getters were Ed Litton and Mike Stone. And so it went to a runoff election on Tuesday afternoon, which was really exciting. But there's president and first vice president and second vice president and recording secretary and registration secretary. There were 5 offices to be voted on by the convention. Well, the rules are you have to elect the president first, and then you have to elect the first vice president and the second vice president. So it has to go in order. Well, if something goes to a runoff, it kind of gums up the works, and we ended up spending until Wednesday casting ballots because things had to be done in a particular order, which was a little irritating to many, but it was okay. It worked out really well. Ed Litton ended up winning the runoff election. Ed is a great ministry down in South Alabama, and I think he'll do a fantastic job as our new president. On Tuesday afternoon, there was the resolutions, and that is the kind of the position statements that the convention chooses to make as public statements. And so I just wanted to kind of go through and highlight some of the things that the resolutions address. One of the resolutions was on Baptist unity and maintaining our public witness. That was amended and then adopted. I'm going to set that one aside and come back to it. There was a resolution on taxpayer complicity in abortion and the Hyde Amendment. And there was a lovely young lady from Alabama named Dana Hall McCain. And she was the presenter of this resolution. And she spoke with much grace. She actually volunteers at a pregnancy crisis center in Alabama. And there were a couple of amendments that were made to the motion or to the resolution that would have, in theory, strengthened the language against abortion. And she was very, very gracious in her response, and she talked about how we need to be kind and loving and gracious, and we don't want to be harsh with our tone in how we deal with folks dealing with the issue of abortion in their life. And she was really a star of the convention meeting. And that resolution was adopted also. There was an amendment on the Equality Act. For those of you that don't know, the Equality Act is a piece of legislation that deals with LGBTQ issues in our country, and moreover than dealing with those issues, it's a direct attack against religious liberty. And there were 3 amendments to that resolution, which was almost utter chaos. But eventually, the resolution was adopted. And again, you're welcome to come and take a look at the specific wording of these things if you'd like to see them. There was a resolution on abuse and pastoral qualifications that was adopted, and basically it says that the messengers of the convention believe that any person who has committed sexual abuse is permanently disqualified from holding the office of pastor. And be it resolved that we recommend that all of our affiliated churches apply this standard to all positions of church leadership. So it was a great stand against sexual abuse in our churches. There was another resolution that was basically a technicality of legalese that needed to be done, and the poor guy who stood up to explain it was a pastor from Kentucky, I believe, and he had to call on the convention legal counsel to really explain what in the world he was doing. But anyway, that carried, but that was more or less a formality for legal filings. There was a resolution that was dropped in the interest of time. I thought it was a very well-worded resolution on Christian citizenship, and it was a denunciation of the Capitol insurrection of January 6th. But in the interest of time, the resolution committee decided to drop that because they just couldn't get to everything. There was a lot of debate. There was also a resolution that was adopted condemning the Uyghur genocide in China. And I didn't realize until after the fact that we are the first American religious body to speak publicly against the Uyghur genocide in China. So that was a good thing that got adopted. There was also a resolution addressing the coronavirus pandemic. The messengers of the Southern Baptist Convention mourn the lives lost to this disease, and we await the day when death will be no more, grief, crying, and pain will be no more, because the previous things have passed away. And that was adopted. But there was a spirit of kind of a homecoming, because so many folks didn't get to see one another a year ago. It was really a kind of a moment of celebration that the pandemic may very well be behind us, and we are thankful for God's provision in the meantime. There was a resolution that took quite a bit of debate. There was a resolution entitled "On the Sufficiency of Scripture for Race and Racial Reconciliation," and the resolution was adopted, and it deals with with critical theories and the like. And so I was encouraged that there was such a well-worded, articulate, nuanced explanation of where we stand, and I think that was a really well-received resolution. I always get the terms motion and resolution mixed up, so you'll have to help me keep them clear, because I barely keep them clear myself. And there were 3 times where the convention messengers raised their ballots, to a 2/3 majority and overruled a committee. That was pretty exciting. My friends from North Carolina thought that they had rarely seen that happen, let alone 3 times in one convention meeting. But 3 times the people raised their ballots to a 2/3 majority and overruled a committee. And one of the things that they did was to pull out a resolution for consideration submitted by a brother, Bill Askell of the Bethel Baptist Church in Oklahoma. And I didn't really, I think I knew this, but anybody from anywhere can submit a resolution in the days leading up to the convention. And basically, they take all the resolutions that are proposed, they sift through them, many of them fall in the same buckets, and they try to articulate things as clearly as possible. The Resolutions Committee does. Well, this particular resolution was proposed to the committee in the days leading up to the convention, and the Committee on Resolutions didn't propose it to the convention. The Committee on Resolutions thought it had done a good enough job with the Hyde Amendment resolution. But the resolution proposed by Mr. Askell from Oklahoma was about the issue of abortion, and it called for the complete and total abolition of abortion without exception or compromise. And there was a bit of contention regarding the language of this resolution, but it ended up being called out of the committee back to the convention floor. So then they had to amend the agenda to make extra time for discussion on Wednesday. It got a little chaotic there for a moment, but that was an issue on Wednesday for consideration. And it ended up being amended. I think the amendment was good. It kind of softened the language a little bit, and the resolution ended up passing. And it cannot be debated that the Southern Baptist Convention is a pro-life denomination. That we, as Southern Baptist Convention churches, are pro-life in our belief system, and so that was adopted among other things. So there's the resolutions. I'll just leave those over there. If anybody has any questions about those, ask me in just a few moments. I did attend a non-sanctioned event on Tuesday evening. There's an organization called 9 Marks Ministries out of Capitol Hill Baptist Church in Washington, D.C., and they hosted a panel discussion on Tuesday evening. They call it 9 Marks at 9. So 9 o'clock in Nashville is 10 o'clock here, and so it was getting late for me, but they began the meeting about 15 minutes early. We met in the sanctuary of the First Baptist Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Beautiful sanctuary. And they had hymnals in the pews, and Mark Dever, the pastor of Capitol Hill, he stood up and he said, "All right, join me in singing hymn number, whatever the number was." And we sang a cappella old hymns. And it was really a wonderful moment of worship. And then he and several other leaders across our denomination sat down for a panel discussion, kind of evaluating the events of the day, looking forward to what Wednesday might entail. They fielded questions from anybody that was there. There was lots of discussion around the respective elephants in the room. Again, one of the elephants in the room was critical race theory. Another of the elephants in the room was the sexual abuse issues, either directly or indirectly as a result of the 2017 article published by the Houston Chronicle, basically just outing the SBC as having rampant sexual abuse in its ranks. Some of you may remember that from secular press several years ago. And so those were the elephants in the room. And there were lots of questions, lots of discussion. Danny Aiken is the head of Southeastern Seminary over in Wake Forest. I love him very, very much. I'm so thankful for him and his ministry. And the question was posed to him, is critical race theory taught at Southeastern Seminary? And he said, yes. And so is Islam. And so, as a worldview, it needs to be understood. It needs to be taught. But it is not espoused or endorsed in any way. Simply because, though it rightly identifies problems in our country and in our world, it wrongly identifies both the causes of those problems and the solutions to those problems. And so he was very articulate. He was very gracious in his response. He was very clear-headed, and I'm really thankful for his leadership and the other leadership of our seminary heads across the country. I will go on to Wednesday morning. There was a report by the Committee on Nominations. There are so many committees, I can't even begin to wrap my head around it. There's a committee on committees, and there's a committee on nominations. And getting them two squared away is a bit of a headache. But the Committee on Nominations, their primary responsibility is to fill the slots, the seats on the executive committee and on the boards of trustees of those 11 entities. And lots of amendments were made to their proposals. Most all of those amendments got shot down, and the report was adopted. But one of the themes that came out of the Committee on Nomination report was that they wanted to see fresh blood in the leadership of our denomination. And there were several folks who were current holders of seats on committees that could have been nominated to a second term, and that committee decided to not nominate them for a second term because they wanted to see fresh blood among the leadership. And I was encouraged by that tone set in the meeting. Also on Wednesday morning, there was a seminary president's report, and Danny Aiken and the other 5 seminary leaders stood up and presented. Al Mohler was one of the heads who presented his report. He had just lost the election for president the day before. Al Mohler stood up and gave his report. And anytime an agency head gives a report to the convention body, they're obligated to field questions for a certain amount of time. And so, again, any Tom, Dick, and Harry can make their way to a microphone and ask a question. And Ed Litton, who had just won the election for president on Tuesday afternoon, he stood up and he very graciously thanked Al Mohler for his leadership, for his service to our convention, and for his wisdom and for his boldness and clarity in the public sphere. He really is, I would argue, the brains of the SBC, the kind of the public academic of the SBC. He debates professors at Harvard. He goes around the world speaking at different universities, and he really represents us well in the academic sphere. And Ed very graciously thanked him for his service, and Al congratulated him, Ed, on his victory as the next president. And it was kind of a moment of public coming together, so to speak. And I was again thankful for the tone with which our business was conducted. Also, J.D. Greer gave his presidential address on Tuesday, and I think you can look it up on YouTube. If you've got 30 minutes, look it up, man. He was a fireball, and it was really, really well done. And then on Wednesday, the convention sermon was given by a Dr. Willie Rice from Florida. I'd never heard of him before, but man, he fed my soul, and it was a wonderful time of hearing from God's word. And I think he really helped our convention hear from the Lord what we needed to hear from the Lord that day. I do have a couple of questions. I think all the questions that were tossed at me ahead of time, I've tried to answer. But someone in our church sent me a text message, and it said they loved J.D. Greer's quote: "Whenever the church gets in bed with politics, the church gets pregnant, and the offspring does not look like God the Father." And J.D. said that very, very well on Tuesday, and I was really thankful. I agree completely with his sentiment in his presidential address. But again, the 3 takeaways that I left with were: 1, the issue of critical theories; 2, the presidential election and the leadership of the convention moving forward; and 3rd is the sexual. Oh, I didn't mention the sexual abuse stuff. Wednesday morning, there's a committee called the Committee on the Order of Business, and they had given Grant Gaines's motion to the executive committee to be dealt with in the coming year. Well, Brother Gaines stood up and said, "I don't think it should go to the executive committee, because I don't think the executive committee should be responsible for dictating the terms of its own investigation." And that was one of the rules, or one of the rulings, where there was a 2/3 majority to call that motion back out of the committee, and it was discussed on the floor. And so it carried, and there was a third-party agency that is going to investigate the sexual abuse allegations and the way in which they were handled since 2017 when that Houston Chronicle article was published. And there was a gentleman from South Georgia who is the current pastor of a church that was mentioned in the Houston Chronicle article. And apparently one of their former staff members had committed a crime, and the executive committee looked into it briefly and said no further investigation is needed. And that pastor said, indeed, further investigation was needed because our church is still reeling with the consequences of this individual's actions. And so we look forward to a continued striving to make right the sins that have been in our camp in recent years. And so we are thankful for the work that is being done to address those issues and hold people accountable, to make sure that we don't foster that environment the way that it had been fostered in years past. Those were my three big takeaways from the convention. But most importantly, I was so encouraged about the work that is being done there. One of the questions that I received from our church was, do you think the Southern Baptist Convention is going to split? I said, I don't think it's going to split because there's nowhere to go. We all agree biblically. We all believe that the Bible is God's word and it is inerrant, and there's theological unity in our convention. And honestly, there's nowhere for us to go because what the reason the Southern Baptist Convention is what it is because we are greater than the sum of our parts. And the cooperative program, as I mentioned, funds hundreds and hundreds of missionaries going across the globe, and hundreds of churches are being planted in the United States and Canada as a result of our faithful giving. And we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could as individual churches. And I'm so thankful for that. We had an event Monday evening before the convention began, and it was a commissioning service. And the North American Mission Board and the International Mission Board commissioned 55-ish missionaries into the mission field. And there was a time of worship and celebration, and it was an encouraging time. I think 5 or 6 of the couples that were being sent into the field had to stand behind a screen, and we could only see their profile because they were going into places where it will be illegal to do what they are going to be doing. And they're going into the hard, dark places around the globe to be the light of Christ. And that's the kind of work that makes the Southern Baptist Convention what it is. And that's the kind of stuff that gets me excited about what is going on. And I'm so thankful that the Lord gives us a chance to be a part of that. And so whether it's our friends in Vermont, whether it's our comrades in arms in unengaged people groups in India or Iran or in Turkey or in places where it's illegal to be a Christian, I'm so thankful for the work that's being done and the fact that we can pool our resources together and see the gospel advanced across the globe. It's a really encouraging thing. So that's why I don't think there's a split coming, because nobody's foolish enough to go, I don't want to be a part of that. Any questions for me about any of the technicality stuff or any of the resolutions or any of the takeaways? Yes, ma'am. Say that again. I can give a lot more detail on that. Pam asked about the equality, the resolution on the Equality Act. Yes, ma'am. I won't read it in its entirety. I'll give you a copy, but I'll just hit the high points. Whereas all persons are created in God's image, are made to glorify Him, and based upon these truths possess inherent dignity. Whereas God's design was the creation of 2 distinct sexes, male and female, which designate the fundamental distinction that God has embedded in the very biology of the human race. Whereas the Bible gives us clear instruction and boundaries with regard to what constitutes God-honoring expression of human sexuality. Whereas Southern Baptists resolved in 2014 on transgender identity that the fall of man into sin and God's subsequent curse have introduced brokenness and futility into God's good creation. Therefore, as a result, some are tempted to question God's gift of sexuality. And it goes on several more times, and it says, "Be it resolved that the messengers of the convention meeting extend love and compassion to those who identify as gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender, and invite all members of this community to further trust in Christ and to experience renewal in the gospel. Be it further resolved that we proclaim that Christ offers forgiveness of sin for those who turn from their sins and believe on Christ. Be it further resolved that we believe effective gospel ministry to individuals who consider themselves part of these communities requires that we speak to them requires that we speak to them and about them with respect and Christ-like love while holding firmly to our biblical convictions. Be it further resolved that we therefore encourage fellow Southern Baptists to engage in discussion of the Equality Act and related issues with this in mind. Be it further resolved that we strongly oppose the Equality Act and urge the Congress to reject this dangerous legislation which represents one of the greatest threats to religious liberty in our nation's history. And finally, that we affirm the role of churches in providing compassionate care, biblical truth, and restorative hope to men, women, and children, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity, while joyfully celebrating God's good design in sexuality as clearly expressed in Scripture." And it was so, I thought it was so well worded. You know, this is, and the reason that resolutions are what they are is because it's kind of a rallying cry. It's something that we can all get behind and affirm. And I think they did a fantastic job on that. Because again, it is one of the most head-on attacks on religious liberty in our convention, or in our country. And to that end, I'll go a step farther about religious liberty. One of the entities that I mentioned was the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. That's kind of the lobbying arm of the SBC. They have an office in Nashville, Tennessee, and an office in Washington, D.C. And they do a lot of great work. But one of the things that the ERLC has done very well, I would argue, is that they hang their hat on two things. They hang their hat on being pro-life, and they hang their hat on being pro-religious liberty. In fact, the ERLC has caught flack from some SBC leaders because they file amicus briefs in court supporting Jewish communities, supporting Muslim communities, because they support religious liberty in general. And I think it's a good thing that we as Baptists can hang our hat on religious liberty. It's something that we should defend. It's something that we should seek to protect. And they do a fantastic job of promoting religious liberty and defending it. The other thing that I would argue that they do so well, they don't get into politics as such, but with the issue of abortion, they are decidedly pro-life. They have a number of great works being done to not simply be anti-abortion, but to be pro-life, both with the issue of abortion and end-of-life decisions like euthanasia and stuff like that. So they do a fantastic work on our behalf because they don't delve into all the political issues. The Bible doesn't speak about every political issue, but they really hang their hat on being pro-life and pro-religious liberty. And I think they do a fantastic job. Are we growing? We as a denomination are not growing significantly in number. We did have, where's my little book? Oh, Lord. There's this book of reports. It's a whole, and I don't know why they give it to you at 7:30 in the morning and expect you to read everything and digest it by 8 o'clock. But there's all these graphs on the growth of the convention. The convention itself is not growing. It is growing in the number of churches, but it is not growing in the number of members. Our membership is actually decreasing. But, and this is kind of counterintuitive, I view it as a good thing, the percentage of members that are regular attenders is actually going up. And so I think that's a positive thing. Baptisms have been holding steady for the past 2 or 3 years. We took a huge plummet in baptisms in the early 2000s and early 2010s, but that's kind of leveled off. And one of the great goals that the executive committee proposed is called Vision 2025. And basically it says we need there's 5 bullet points in this vision. One of the bullet points is we need to commit ourselves to ministry to kids under the age of 18, youth and children's ministry, because we know that if someone is going to become a lifelong follower of Jesus Christ, odds are overwhelming that they get baptized either as a child or as a teenager. And so they really want us to double down our efforts in children's and youth ministries because we want to see baptisms trend back up again. So it was kind of a rallying call, and I was encouraged by that. Oh, Pam's got more questions. How exciting. No, don't be sorry. Let Randy hold the microphone for you so everybody can hear you.
I know the churches are all separate, but I know that we pay dues or fees or apportionments or whatever you want to call it, so we can collectively do things globally. Mm-hmm. How is it determined how much each church pays?
We decide.
We choose what we want to send?
Yeah. We don't get an invoice. Nobody makes us pay dues. We give what we want to give.
Wow.
And again, every church is independent. We give what we choose to give. And we've tried to make a habit of at least very slightly increasing our giving in recent years to both the Pilot Mountain Baptist Association and to the cooperative program. And I think that's money well spent. We do. And if you look at our budget spreadsheet, the big report that Lisa gives every, I don't know when, once a quarter or something. I guess we haven't had a church conference in a while. But those big reports, it may be the very top 2 line items. I don't know. It's near the top. One is entitled Cooperative Program, and one is entitled either Associational Missions or Pilot Mountain Baptist Association. And we give what we want to give. And every year when the finance committee does its work, we put in the budget what needs to be put in the budget. And so we're not given an invoice, we're not assessed any dues or anything like that. We give what we choose to give. And our church, not every church does it this way. In fact, many of the newer churches don't do it this way. But our church gives a slice of undesignated receipts. So we have that line item is basically a percentage of our overall budget. 6.5%. 6.5%. There you go. But it's good. I mean, it's a good thing to be a part of. And a lot of churches give a specific dollar amount, but what we do is we allocate a portion of receipts. And so, if you look at the year-end report on September 30 each year, you'll see the number, and it may or may not line up with the budgeted amount, because we may or may not have collected the budgeted amount. So it's, we don't give a set $15,000 a year or whatever. We give a proportion of our tithes and offerings. Yes, ma'am. I should have brought the question was, and we depend on the SBC to allocate where and what they do. I should have brought my pie chart up here. I got a great big poster from the Baptist State Convention 2 years ago, I think. But it has a big pie chart. And Pastor Jim, I'm going to throw him under the bus right now, is a member of the board of directors for the Baptist State Convention. And the board of directors sets a budget on the state level. This gets sent to Campbell University, this gets sent to Baptist Hospital, this gets sent to Baptist Men, disaster relief stuff, and then this gets sent to Nashville, Tennessee, to the Southern Baptist Convention. And so then the Southern Baptist Convention has a big budget of what it receives from all the states, and it allocates monies to the seminaries, it allocates monies to the mission boards, and other stuff. By the way, it doesn't allocate any money to Lifeway Christian Resources. Lifeway stands on its own. It's a nonprofit organization, but it operates as a business. It doesn't receive any CP dollars. And I am very thankful that the International Mission Board and the North American Mission Board receive the lion's share of the monies every year, as it should be. As it should be. You may have to come up here after we're adjourned, but I think I can come up with a number quickly. Maybe not. I want to say it's like 60 or 65% go to the mission boards. The lion's share go to those two mission boards, either the North American Mission Board or the International Mission Board. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Randy.
Are any of the positions, officer positions, are they paid positions, or is it all volunteer?
It's all volunteer. There are employees, there are staff. Each of the seminary heads, they're an employee. Each entity has a kind of a CEO or whatever they call it, and so those are paid employees. But the boards of trustees and the members of the executive committee, those are unpaid positions. They volunteer their time. There are some reimbursements involved. If I were a member of the executive committee and I had to go to Nashville 3 or 4 times a year for meetings, they would cover my hotel room and my airfare or whatever the deal is. So there is some money in there somewhere, but they don't receive a salary of any kind. No, they're entirely volunteer. It is indeed a demanding job. And J.D. Greer, and this just goes to show you his wonderful, winsome, lovable leadership. He's active on Twitter, and for those of you that aren't on Twitter, you need to get on Twitter. It's just amazing. But you'll waste your whole life on Twitter, by the way. But J.D. Greer quoted Al Pacino in The Godfather or some other movie a couple of weeks ago or a couple of days ago, and he said, "Just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in." Because there was some discussion over Twitter in the past couple of weeks about someone. They accused someone else of plagiarizing JD's sermons, and JD said, "No, we talked about it. He called me. I said, you're welcome to use anything I've got. There's all truth is God's truth. Don't." Yeah. And so he got sucked into that argument on social media just last week. I'm trying to find this budget, but I don't know where it is in this table of contents. Any other questions for me? Let me leave you with this thought. Again, we as a convention of churches can do so much more together than we can as individual churches. And that's why we do what we do. That's why we engage with who we engage. I got to see friends of mine from other corners of North Carolina that I've rubbed shoulders with for several years now. I got to see several of our friends from Vermont that work through the North American Mission Board and one of the Bible colleges up there. And so it's a joy to be a part of the family of God at that level, because you know that what binds you together is the love of Christ and the fact that indeed you are brothers and sisters in the name of Jesus. And I heard it put, I don't know, did Luke say it this past Sunday? I don't even know. But we have more in common with a brother or a sister in India that doesn't speak a lick of English than our neighbor who is unsaved. And let's always be mindful of that. And so what binds us together across the globe is the unity that we have in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And he has saved us from our sin, and he has given us a great, good message worth proclaiming. And I'm thankful that we are faithful in proclaiming it. Well, let me pray for us. Anything else from you, Pastor Jim? You want me to pray, or do you want to pray? I'll pray. Lord, thank you for our time together tonight. I thank you for the great work that is being done through the local association of churches, through our state convention of churches, and through the Southern Baptist Convention. And God, thank you for allowing us to be a part of what's going on. It is exciting. It is encouraging to be a part of biblically faithful churches that take the Great Commission to heart and strive to be more obedient to it. And Lord, I pray that in all that we do, I pray that we would be the salt and the light, the hands and feet of Christ that you've called us to be. Because indeed we do have that great good news. And may we be faithful to proclaim it to folks that need to hear it so desperately. Help us to always be loving of our neighbors. Help us always to be gracious. Help us always to put the needs of others ahead of our own. And may we be faithful servants so that your kingdom might be advanced here in Walnut Cove and the world beyond. And we ask all of these things in Jesus' saving name. Amen.